12 of the fantasy football season, and here's a few quarterbacks I would start this week. The first guy, Cam Newton of the Carolina Panthers. So Cam Newton made his first start for the Panthers in a few seasons, and right here he had a pretty good game in Week 11 versus the Washington football team. So since returning to a couple weeks ago to the Panthers, Week 10 in spot duty at Arizona at the goal line, 8 passing yards, a touchdown, 3 carries, 14 yards, and a touchdown. And last week versus Washington, 189 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, and 46 rushing yards with a touchdown. So right here in Week 12, another good matchup on paper for Cam Newton at the Miami Dolphins that give up the 5th most fantasy points to quarterbacks on the season. And in this one, I think he could easily get 25 to 30 points once again. Obviously on the ground, he's good anywhere from 7 to 10 fantasy points with the yards and if he gets a touchdown or not. So right here, Cam Newton, he's still available in a decent amount of fantasy leagues at 48%. But this week versus Miami, I think he has a good game. The next quarterback's Russell Wilson of the Seattle Seahawks. So Russ Wilson, he came back a few weeks ago, and he hasn't been good, no doubt about it. He's really struggled, and I don't think he's 100% from that finger injury. So the last few games since the return, Week 10 at Green Bay, 161 passing yards, 2 interceptions, and 32 yards rushing. And Week 11 versus Arizona, 207 passing yards. So right here, he's having trouble with Wilson. The accuracy hasn't been there. And obviously, it was a bad injury to his throwing hand, getting the rod in one of his fingers here. So right now, he's got a great matchup, though, in Week 12 at the Washington football team. And if he can't get anything going at Washington, then it's a major problem, in my opinion. This Seattle team's most likely out of the playoff hunt after losing the last 3 out of 4. So right here, Russ Wilson on Monday Night Football, I think he gets things together here and has a big ball game. So right here, this will be the last week if he can't get it going that I would have confidence starting him. The next quarterback's Jalen Hurts of the Philadelphia Eagles. So Jalen Hurts, he's been solid this season in the first year as a starter for Philadelphia in the first year. So they traded Carson Wentz in the offseason, and Hurts, he's starting to get in the zone, and so is this Eagle team, winning the 3 out of the last 4 here. So the last few games for Hurts. Week 9 versus the Chargers, 162 passing yards, a touchdown, and 62 yards rushing. Week 10 at Denver, 178 passing yards, 2 touchdowns, and 53 yards rushing. And last week versus New Orleans, a huge ball game, 147 passing yards, 18 rush attempts, 69 yards, and 3 touchdowns. So each and every week, this guy's almost good for 10 points running the football here. The passing yards obviously haven't been great, but when you can run the football like Jalen Hurts has and score the touchdowns on the ground like he has this season, there's no need to throw the football 40 or 50 times. And right here, another great matchup for him, Week 12 at the New York Giants that give up the 11th most fantasy points to quarterbacks on the season. I expect Hurts once again to go for 25 or 30 fantasy points in this one. The next quarterback I would start is Joe Burrow of the Cincinnati Bengals. So Joe Burrow, it's a pretty solid season for him this year, even though the last 2 weeks here, it's been a little bit of a slump for Burrow. Week 9 versus Cleveland, 282 passing yards, 2 interceptions. And Week 11 in Vegas, he didn't do much in that one because the defense had a great game for them. 148 passing yards, a touchdown, 11 rushing yards, and a fumble loss. So right here, he's got a pretty decent matchup versus the Pittsburgh Steelers, who I know on paper give up the 12th least amount of fantasy points to quarterbacks on the season. But we just saw the Los Angeles Chargers drop 41 points on the Steelers. So right here, early in the season of Pittsburgh, he had a pretty solid game. 172 pass yards and 3 touchdowns with an intho. So right here, I think Burrow in this one, he'll bounce back. He'll have a good performance. And I think 20 to 25 fantasy points is very doable for him this week. And the 5th and final quarterback I would start this week is Jimmy Garoppolo, the San Francisco 49ers. So Jimmy G, he's come off of injury as well on Week 7. And since then, he's played good football. Week 7, I know it was the rain game versus Indianapolis, but ever since then, Week 8 at the Bears, 322 passing yards, 2 rushing touchdowns, and a 2-point conversion. Week 9 versus the Cardinals, 326 passing, 2 touchdowns, and an intho. Week 10 versus the Rams, 182 passing, and 2 touchdowns. And Week 11 at Jacksonville, another decent ball game, 176 passing yards, and 2 touchdowns. So right here, Week 12, he's got a good matchup versus the Minnesota Vikings that give up the 7th most fantasy points to quarterbacks on the season. So right here, we know the Vikings each and every week, they're pretty much in a shootout where their opponents are getting anywhere from 24 to 31 points a game. And right here, this Niner team, they're riding hot a little winning the last 3 out of 4. And Jimmy Garoppolo has been a big reason of that. So this week here versus Minnesota, I would have confidence starting him, and I think he could score 20-plus fantasy points in this one. So that's a few quarterbacks I would start for Week 12 of the fantasy football season.